the story of Zitkala-Ša. She was also known as Gertrude Simmons Bonnin, which combines her missionary given name and her later married name. She was of the Sioux Nation. She was a writer and musician, educator, and political activist. She wrote several works chronicling her struggles with her cultural identity and the pull between the majority culture she was educated within and her Dakota Sioux culture into which she was born and raised. I'm going to start with one of my favorite quotes of hers. Look up and see a new day dawning. Zitkala-Ša was born on February 22, 1876, on the Yankton Indian Reservation. She spent her early childhood on the reservation with her mother, who was of Sioux Dakota heritage. When Zitkala was 8 years old, missionaries from the Whites Manual Labor Institute in Indiana came to the Yankton Reservation to recruit children for their boarding school. Zitkala-Ša's older brother had recently returned from such a school, and her mother was hesitant to send her daughter away. Zitkala-Ša, however, was eager to go. For children who had never been off the reservation, the school sounded like a magical place. The missionaries told stories about riding trains and picking red apples in large fields. After debating the decision, Zitkala-Ša's mother agreed to let her go. She did not want her daughter to leave and did not trust the white strangers, but she feared the Dakota way of life was ending. There were no schools on the reservation, and she wanted her daughter to have an education. According to her autobiography, as soon as Zitkala-Ša boarded the train, she regretted begging her mother to not let her go. She was about to spend years away from everything she knew. She did not know English, and tribal languages were banned at the school. She would be forced to give up her Dakota culture for a, quote, American one. Zitkala-Ša's arrival at the school was traumatic. The children learned that everyone would get a haircut. In Dakota culture, the only people to get haircuts were cowards who had been captured by the enemy. Zitkala-Ša resisted by hiding in an empty room. When the staff of the school found her underneath a bed, they dragged her out, tied her to a chair, and cut off her braids as she cried out loud. Later in life, she wrote that the staff of the school did not care about her feelings and treated the children like, quote, little animals. After a few years, the school granted Zitkala-Ša permission to visit her mother during a school break. During the visit, her mother encouraged her to abandon school and stay at home. But she later wrote that visiting home made her sad. She returned to the school. Like many children, she may have felt that she no longer belonged on the reservation. Life at the school had changed her. In 1895, Zitkala-Ša graduated and joined a teacher training program at Earlham College in Indiana, where she was one of the few indigenous students. She then transferred to the New England Conservatory of Music, where she studied the violin. By 1900, she was teaching music and speech at the Carlisle Indian School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, one of the most famous boarding schools in the country. Zitkala-Ša worked at the Carlisle School for less than 2 years. The experience reminded her of her traumatic education. She watched a new generation of young children arrive on trains and have their hair brutally cut. She began to question why the school required the children to give up their entire culture in exchange for an education. She saw the staff treat children cruelly and learned that the government paid the school for every child successfully removed from a reservation. She realized the schools were designed to erase her people's culture. Zitkala-Ša channeled her frustration into a love for writing. She wrote about her personal experiences and the customs and the values she had learned from her mother. Soon her essays and short stories were published in national magazines like Atlantic Monthly and Harper's Monthly. In 1901, she published a compilation of her work in a book called Old Indian Legends. That same year, Zitkala-Ša left the Carlisle School and returned to South Dakota. She took a job at the United States Bureau of Indian Affairs that supported her financially while she continued her true passion. writing stories that promoted Dakota culture and values. While working at the Bureau, Zitkala-Ša met fellow employee Raymond Bonnin. They were married in 1902 and had one son, whom they named Raymond. The family moved to Utah, where Zitkala-Ša worked as a teacher. She did not teach at a boarding school, but at a school on the Ute Reservation where children lived at home. While teaching, she met William Hansen, a music professor at Brigham Young University. With William's help, Zitkala-Ša combined her love of music and writing. She wrote The Sundance, an opera based on her essays. It was the first published opera written by a person indigenous to North America. Because many indigenous customs were passed down orally through music, Zitkala-Ša believed it was a powerful way to share her family's value and reach a new audience. Zitkala-Ša would spend the rest of her life trying to preserve the custom of the indigenous people of North America. Her strength instills a loving will, gives guidance to the flow. The Cascades' beauty